Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I hope you didn't miss us too terribly while we were away these past couple of weeks, but we are back and with a vengeance. I am Rob Kent, as you know, the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. My favorite book, incidentally, the one I wrote, about an 11-year-old biracial boy detective who fights giant robot bees. It's a wonderful story. You're going to enjoy it. And more importantly, you can get it for free. The ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this forever. It's available obviously in paperback, and the audiobook is narrated by the wonderful David Radke. Get yourself a copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Get yourself ready for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. That will be available in May. Just this last weekend gave a copy to Banneker's #1 fan. So he's reading it and letting me know, making sure that it's up to snuff and ready for a debut. That will be available here in May. I'm never going to stop talking about it. Banneker Bones and the Alligator People. For today, get yourself ready with Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees for free. And honestly, if you read the blog, middlegradeninja.com, if you've paid attention to me at all over the years, you're paying attention to the show, don't you want to know if I can write for all this time I'm talking about it, and you can find out for free? Maybe I'm terrible. Maybe this will be your modus operandi for never paying any attention to me again. Or maybe I know a little something about writing, and you're going to have a good story. I hope it's the latter. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written young adult horror novels, All Together Now a Zombie Story, and All Right Now a Zombie Story. Ernest Hemingway fans, who I assume tune into a show about middle grade books, you're going to love All Right Now. It is almost a retelling of Hemingway's The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber. So if you like that story, you know what that's about, and you just wish it had zombies in it, here we go, All Right Now. And then I've got the novel, the series. The Book of David is 5 books long. The first book is free to download whenever you're paying attention to this. It is a long, slow burn. You've heard me talk about flying saucers. You've heard me talk about alien abduction. This is the book. The Book of David is UFOs and flying saucers, cover to cover. Today's episode of the Middle Grade Ninja is brought to you by MoCon. MoCon is a festival here in Indianapolis run by the wonderful Maurice Broaddus. Maurice, of course, is the author of the Knights of Brentwood and the upcoming The Usual Suspects. You might have seen, if you've been following on Twitter, Maurice got a 6-figure book deal recently for his space trilogy that we're shouting from the rooftops. I'm so happy for Maurice. And Maurice throws just a heck of a con. It's $75. That includes the food, and it's 3 days of hanging out with editors, literary agents, authors. I'm going to be there. I am not an honored guest this year, but my plan is, if I keep talking about MoCon, by next year, I will be an honored guest, and that'll be exciting. So come and see me this year, unhonored. Come back the next year and see me honored. MoCon is May 3rd through May 5th. As far as the show goes, we are going to be talking to multiple intelligent women. I'm a little bit intimidated by the lineup we've got coming. Today, we're going to talk with Megan Beatie. On Monday, we are going to talk with Padma Vakataraman. We're going to talk about her new novel, The Bridge Home. I have just read it this week. It has devastated me. It is an incredible read. And Padma is a scientist. She's lived in 5 different countries. She has been an oceanographer. She's been a school director. She speaks multiple languages. I am extremely intimidated about Monday's episode because I know she's going to have nothing but wonderful information to share with us. On Thursday next week, we're going to have literary agent Holly Root, another strong, very smart, intelligent woman that's going to intimidate me. And then on the 22nd, we'll be talking with editor Allison Weiss. So a heck of a lineup. If you missed the show, rest assured, we're back and stronger than ever, so look forward to future episodes. Today, we're talking with public relations expert and publicist, Megan Beatie. Megan, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. We were negotiating to do an episode for author Amber Smith, who will be here this summer. And she included you on the email. I thought, oh my gosh, what an amazing opportunity. We absolutely have to talk to somebody like Megan Beatie. So I'm so glad you made the time for us today. If you would tell esteemed audience just a little bit about yourself and your expertise.
Sure thing. Well, I was an English major in college and loved books all my life. I mean, just to tell you a silly little anecdote, when I got my driver's license at age 16, I did not know how to get around my own hometown because every time I got in the car when my parents would drive me, I would read a book. I read every single moment I possibly could. So always a book lover. And after I graduated from college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I found out that there was actually a school you could go to learn about book publishing. And at the time, it was called the Radcliffe Publishing Course. Now it got moved to the Columbia Publishing Course in New York. And I went to Radcliffe in Boston for a summer and learned all about every aspect of publishing, from copy editing to editing to publicity. And I heard the course would bring in these speakers from top literary agents and heads of publishing houses from New York to come talk to us young people about publishing. And I remember so vividly hearing Carol Schneider, who was the head of publicity for Random House. She came and talked to us, and it was like I was struck by a lightning bolt. Like, that is my dream job, to talk about books, to champion books, to go to book parties, and to kind of be I think of it as being a cheerleader for books, because you're really, you're trying to get people excited about the various books that you're championing. So I finished the course and ended up, the course helped the graduates get jobs in New York at publishing houses. And so this was 1996. And we were these young college graduates starting our first jobs in publishing, and the starting salaries were like $20,000 salary. But we were like, we don't care. We're gonna do this. We're gonna, like, my two best friends and I shared a 1-bedroom in Manhattan, and we got jobs. I was lucky enough to get the highest salaried job of my class of $27,000. I mean, seriously, that was like, whoa.
I mean, we're talking 1996 money, so that maybe what would be 35, maybe even 39,000 today.
And we're talking living in Manhattan too. So where the apartments, I mean, I think we paid like $1,200, maybe more than that, for our Upper East Side apartment. So
you said it was you and two other people in the 1-bedroom?
Oh yeah. So we had, my two friends shared the room, and then we kind of divided up the main room with a wall. I mean, it was crazy. But it was the thrill and the glamour of going into New York City publishing. So so the job I got was I was assisting the executive director of publicity at Putnam. And so Putnam at the time was not, this is way before Putnam was merged with Penguin, which is now merged with Random House. So Putnam was its own entity, and published, amazing authors: Tom Clancy, Dick Francis, Robert Parker, Alice Hoffman. I mean, you name it, these major best-selling authors, and they would come in to meet with my boss, and I would just like have to pinch myself that these authors that I had read and was in awe of were like there in front of me. So I worked for Putnam for almost a year. Speaking very candidly, if you've seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, that was a lot of my experience working at Putnam that first year in book publishing. It was very, very.
Do you want to identify who was the Meryl Streep character by name?
I don't know if I should. I think it's been so long. It was Marilyn Ducksworth, who is a brilliant mind and a brilliant publicist. But man, oh man, I had some of the most traumatic times of my entire career that first year of publishing, which I don't think I'll share any real details, but it was, if you've seen the movie, there's a scene in where the Meryl Streep character sends Andy for a skirt, and she gives no information except she wants a skirt, but she obviously wants something very, very particular. And Andy realizes, or she asks a colleague, I think, that she can't ask any more questions. And that's a lot of how my first year, as I remember it, was. Like, you would get 10% of the information, and you had to figure out the other 90% because you couldn't ask your boss, but you had to deliver what was in her mind. So it was very, very challenging. But
Well, obviously, you've moved on and you've flourished since then. So, how did you overcome that environment? What tips can you give for somebody? Obviously, publishing is a whole nother world, and there's no Meryl Streep characters anymore. But just in case there was somebody who was in a situation like that, what advice would you give them?
it was baptism by fire, and I'm so grateful for that year. I really am. I look back, and I worked with, again, an amazing publicist who um, was just at the top of her game, and I learned so much by observing and taking mental notes. And she really set a standard of excellence in her work for me that I think I've carried throughout my career. Um, and she led me in an indirect way. I was so like, oh my gosh. The other thing was about this job, I was, and cut me off if I'm going into too much detail, but
No such thing for our listeners.
okay. So the other thing about this job, it was very secretarial. So, and I knew, like, starting out in publishing, you have to pay your dues. There's a lot of old-fashioned aspects about publishing, which we can get into later, but you really have to pay your dues. So, I had graduated from Middlebury College. I was a few years out of college. I thought I was pretty hot, and it really had to. I had to, tell myself, pay your dues. It's okay to be a secretary, because you will eventually get the opportunities to do real book publicity. And I realized in my work at Putnam that my boss, what she needed was a secretary, an administrative assistant. It wasn't so much about nurturing my growth, but I needed to fulfill what she needed done. And that was fine short term, but long term, I had places to go. So I ended up, it's fun to think back on my career and remember the women who were so instrumental, directly or indirectly, in where I am today. Because the next woman that I'm thinking of is a woman. Her name is Aileen Boyle, and she's a freelance publicist now. At the time, she was at HarperCollins, and I interviewed with her for an associate, because at the time with Marilyn at Putnam, I was a publicity assistant, and I interviewed with Aileen Boyle to be a associate publicist, which is the next jump up. And I was just so excited. I thought I just completely nailed the interview, and that Aileen was going to hire me, and I was going to go to work for HarperCollins. And she didn't hire me, but she recommended me to a friend of hers who was at this book PR agency called Goldberg McDuffie Communications. And at Putnam, I'd heard about Goldberg McDuffie. They was a freelance PR firm. But I went in for an interview with the woman whose name is Grace McQuaid at Goldberg McDuffie. And I interviewed with Neil McDuffie, and then with Lynn Goldberg, who's the head of the company. And it was like I coming home. Like, they loved my experience. They loved that I had, like, been in the trenches at Putnam, and they loved me, and they made me a job offer, and they made me a full publicist. So I went to work for Goldberg McDuffie Communications end of 1997. And I worked for Goldberg McDuffie Communications for 17 years. It was amazing. It was like, truly, I mean, a dream come true, because when I went to Goldberg McDuffie, it was a place where they gave me my own books to represent. even though I'd just been an assistant, and they said, you know, here's what we want you to do. We want you to, you know, we'll nurture you, we'll teach you. We want you to ask questions. If you don't understand what to do, ask us. And it was like this mix of freedom and trust, and I thrived there, and I'm so proud that I was able to work there for 17 years. I worked there for I think 4 years, 3 years in the New York office, and worked with, I mean, all kinds of authors. I remember the first book that was my very own to do the publicity for was a book called Found Dogs by Elise Lumpkin, and it was this beautiful book of photo essays of dogs that had been rescued, and the people who had rescued them, and the ways in which those dogs had changed their new owners' lives. And it was such a great book to work on. I'm a big dog lover. And it's just a very special book as I think back, because it really was my very first book that I did the publicity for. But I worked on all sorts of books. I mean, I did Monica Lewinsky's book. I worked on that book with my boss, which was, I mean, an experience like nothing ever in my entire career.
What was the experience of doing the publicity for a book like that?
Well, it was beyond anything, because it wasn't a book. It was a news event. So I was the point person for the media, and it was actually not written by Monica. It was written by Andrew Morton, who's written a lot of very juicy books about the royal family and various others. So, and he's fantastic. He's a wonderful interview. So he was really the person who was going to be doing the interviews for the book, but everyone wanted to do something on this book. So I would be at my desk, and my phone rang nonstop for like, I mean, it felt like weeks, but I think it was, there's always like this really quick firestorm. So it was like a week of my phone was ringing. People were less on email then. It was really more about the phone. So my phone would ring, I'd pick it up. And in that moment, like I'd have the conversation and hang up, and then I'd have like 10 voicemail messages. And it just went on and on and on. And it wasn't just US media, it was everyone in the world. Every country, every media outlet was calling, wanting to get some sort of media scoop on this book. So,
and I mean, email or phone calls instead of emails, you'd be working, 3-4 times harder than somebody doing that same job today, right?
Oh, I know. So yeah, that was a really, I mean, an amazing, fun project. I worked on at Goldberg McDuffie. I worked on Princess Diana's Bodyguards book. That was another very big media book. And then, so many others that, I love working on the big splashy books. That's always fun and always exciting. But I love working on a book that I feel at the end of a campaign, I feel like if I hadn't been a part of it, it wouldn't have gotten as much attention as it did. Like when I feel like I've really made a difference on a book that might have been overlooked, like that is an incredibly satisfying aspect of the job. So so Goldberg McDuffie, I was in the New York office. September 11th happened. It was I remember that day so vividly, as so many people do. We were working as an agency. We were working on Jack Welch's autobiography, and he was going to have a press conference that day at 11. And I got into the office at like 8:45, and then the planes happened, and it just unfolded, and we were evacuated because our office was close to 30 Rock and NBC and the media, and so yeah, I mean, and all of the, horror that happened, it was just a real, long term, it was a real wake up call for me. I love New York. I knew like New York publishing is, that's the epicenter of publishing. But um, I'm a fifth generation of a farming family in Southern California, and my family is the most important thing to me. And I just felt like I really wanted to be where my heart is. So it felt like career suicide to leave New York when I'm trying to do book publicity. But Lynn Goldberg, amazing mentor and friend, she would not let me quit. She said, I think they read books in Los Angeles. Go see what you can do out there. And it was great. And I have really, I built up a local um, network in Los Angeles. And then I would work with authors, and some of them wouldn't even know I wasn't still in the New York office, because then at that time, that was, 2001, people were, much more internet savvy, and it was, I could get up really early and work with a UK client, and they wouldn't know the difference. So it was really great, and I'm so grateful that I was able to work for Goldberg McDuffie remotely as long as I did.
And were you vice president at that time, or did that come later?
I'm trying to think. No, I think I must have gotten that promotion while working remotely. So Lynn was always just so generous with her titles, and she wanted us to feel, because we weren't, because there is such a hierarchy in a publishing house of titles. Even though we were a small agency of like, it sort of varied between 5 and 4 and 7 publicists in the agency. She wanted us to feel that we were on the same level as the publicists who were in house at publishing houses. So, yeah. So, go ahead.
At that point, by the time you're moving out to LA, I'm assuming you had most of the contacts you would have needed to make in New York, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, yeah, it was great, because I had those contacts, and I would just always, whenever I go back to New York at least a few times a year. So I'm making sure I have that FaceTime, because I'm a firm believer that email is great and super efficient, but there's nothing like FaceTime for really having authentic um, connections with people. And that's advice that I give my authors too, is don't, we can obviously get into that too, but don't stay in the ivory tower. You gotta, write good books, but then you gotta get out in the world and talk to people and shake hands and sign books. And so yeah, so it worked out really well, to have kind of the New York sensibility, but also figure out the LA literary landscape. So
That's kind of a hobby horse of mine, because I work remotely. My wife works remotely much of the week. She's in the tech industry. And I wonder, when I see some of the expenses that publishers in New York accrue over time, in
yeah,
this day and age, you and I are chatting. I'm in Indiana, you're in Los Angeles. Anybody can email anybody from anywhere in the world. Why are they still paying those Manhattan rates? Why are they making their publicists live in three people in a studio apartment or a one-bedroom apartment?
yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think more and more people are pushing back, really trying to live where it's meaningful and cheaper. And I think there tends to be kind of, some companies are just more used to it than others. Goldberg McDuffie, where I wasn't the first. There had already been one publicist who moved to Austin, Texas for her family, and she had done amazingly well working remotely. So for Lynn at the time, um, it wasn't something that she couldn't get her mind around. But I think for publishers, where there is so much, there are many in-person meetings and department meetings, and everyone's together and on the same time zone, I think it's hard to kind of let people disperse, because um, there, I think publishers do really rely on kind of the face-to-face connections. So But certainly I have a little network of book publicists in LA, and um, two of my friends are working remotely for publishers who are based in New York, and they're doing amazing. So it can totally work, and I hope that more people have the opportunity to do it.
And when you're networking and making relationships that you need to sustain you and sustain the books that you want to promote, um, I'm assuming you're not just walking up to people every time you need something, like, hello, let me talk to you about this book that we're doing right this moment, and then I'll never talk to you again until the next book.
Yeah.
So how are you going out and socializing with people and making those connections?
Yeah, all different ways. There's a number of media contacts who cover books in Los Angeles, so I'm reaching out to them to schedule a lunch. Can I talk to you about the exciting books I have coming up in the summer and the fall? And
A lunch like that, is that on you?
yeah, no, definitely. And what I do try to do is do it with my group so that we're maximizing that journalist time. So if three of us come out, and I believe we're all in this together. So I don't see my friends, because I have friends who are also freelance book publicists. So I don't see them as, oh, competitors. I see them as colleagues, because I'm a one-woman show, and it can be isolating. And I think your greatest success as a book publicist is having colleagues to bounce ideas off of, to say, like, oh, did you hear so and so is no longer covering books at the San Francisco Chronicle? Here's the new person. So you just, as a publicist, you just can't exist in a vacuum. You really have to socialize with your own tribe. And so to that end, I'll often say to my publicist friend, hey, Entertainment Weekly is now in Los Angeles. Let's, shall we go as a group? Shall we invite the book editor out to lunch? And usually the media is open to that, because they're not just meeting with one person; they're hearing from the representatives from a number of publishers, and so it only can help with what they're doing and help their efforts. So there's a lot of that. The LA Times Book Festival is this weekend. Huge, amazing festival, and so there's an award ceremony on Friday night. So I always, I go to that and make sure I smile and visit with people. Yeah, I mean, any opportunity for FaceTime, I think, is really really important, so people see that I'm not just an email address. I'm a human being who really really loves what I do. Sorry, let me just turn this off.
And then go ahead. I wanted to ask you, because obviously you're a big reader.
Yeah.
Are you was this extrovert tendencies that you've had to develop? Is that a skill you had to acquire, or have you always been an extrovert who just also likes the introverted activity of reading?
That's a great question, because I was so shy growing up, so shy. I mean, my mom would, in the grocery store, my mom would say, would ask me to go ask the grocery store clerk where the apple juice is, and I would make my younger sister do it, because I didn't want to talk to people. So I would say I'm a conscious extrovert. I have to really make myself, because it's very easy to stay home behind the computer screens. But I push myself, and I'm always happy that I went somewhere where I didn't know a soul and made myself talk to strangers. I always meet someone interesting who might lead to something great for the books I'm working on, or just who's interesting to talk to. So yeah, but I have to push myself.
Well, I want to talk to you about the services that you're offering, all manner of publicity. But I also want to ask, just knowing that you are a book nerd like me, and you've got to meet all of these wonderful authors at such a young age. Um, what is the most awkward encounter that you had? Did you ever just make a fool of yourself in front of somebody so famous and so amazing that you admired?
Oh,
I do it all the time. That's why I
no,
ask.
totally. I'm just trying to think which one. Oh my goodness. this is a funny story. I didn't actually embarrass myself in front of the author, but it's just too good a story not to tell. So I work with Marcia Clark on her legal thrillers, and she's a fantastic writer. I love her books. She's this great series. And she was doing this interview it's called Home and Family, and it's a TV show on the Hallmark Channel, and they film on a lot at Universal Studios. It's like where the old Desperate Housewives that is. So it's like you still see Wisteria Lane and all this stuff. So Marcia was going there in a car, and I planned to meet her there, and I'm not good with directions. Let's just say that. So I get to the gate guard, and I pull in, and they're like, go to get to the where the studio is, you have to like go left, go right, turn left on Steven Spielberg Way, and then go. So I'm like trying to follow the directions. And this is on the Universal Studios lot where they have the tours. And I must have made a wrong turn, because all of a sudden I see myself going down this road, and there is the water and the shark from Jaws. Okay, so I'm coming down. I'm like, whoa, there's the shark from Jaws. Coming the other way on the one-way street is the big Universal Studios tour bus. So here I am playing chicken with the Universal Studios tour bus, with the shark right there, clearly not where I'm supposed to be. And the tour guide is like, what are you doing? So I was like, oh my God. So I backed up and made the right turn, and then finally got to the where the studio was. So luckily Marcia had no idea, but I was so embarrassed and could not believe I'd done that. It was just so typical me. So yeah.
I think in a game of chicken like that, we all know the shark wins.
I know.
That's how it has to end.
I know.
Well, I want to. I've got all kinds of questions for you about publicity and how to market. But before we get to any of it, I gotta ask: have you, Megan Beatie, ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
Gosh, I remember as a kid hearing like this weird like whoa 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 noise and wanting to believe. Like I'm sure it was a helicopter or something, but I just remember that like desperately wanting to believe like that's what it was. I never saw anything, and I think it would be so cool to see one. So cool, but no, never have.
It's on my bucket list before I go. That's something I want to see.
Yeah, totally.
Well, my wife's always telling me, when it comes to life goals, you should do things you have control over. Well, I look up a lot. Well, let's talk about publicity. So if an author comes to you and they say, Megan Beatie, world-renowned publicist, publishing expert, make my book a superstar. What kind of services do you provide? How do you go about running a book?
Sure. Yeah. I have many authors who will call and say, I want to be a New York Times bestseller. What can you do to make me one? And I say, whoa, 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 back up. And there's a lot of part of my job, which is not in the job description so much, is really author education, is laying out the realities and tempering the expectations, because I think what I do has incredible value. This is maybe going off on a little bit of a tangent, but one of the biggest questions I get from authors is, what do you do that's different from an in-house publicist? So, because if you're going to have a book published by, say, Random House, you're going to be assigned a publicist who is to handle all the PR aspects of your book. So it's a completely valid question. Why would I spend a lot of money, because book PR is not cheap? Why would I spend a lot of money on something that is going to be part of the book being published where I would
start there real quick if we could. If I'm an author coming to you and I'm trying to budget for your amazing services, or a different publicist, what sort of publicity budget should an author be setting aside up and above what their publisher may have already put in?
Sure. Yeah. I'll have authors who'll come and say, I'm looking for publicity and I have $2,000, and I'll say, well, not me then. I mean, I'm sort of an all or nothing gal. I mean, it's hard for me to just do, like, people will say, okay, I just want the New York Times and Entertainment Weekly, just those two things. How much? It just doesn't work like that. I have to cast a wide net to, like, you have to go after 200 media outlets to get 10 things or 15 things or 20 things. So it's really hard to kind of have a very narrow scope. So that's all to say, I like to be very immersive. It's hard to kind of just do this and that with a book project. So I like to I'm a good writer, so I like to write all the press materials. I like to brainstorm with my authors and figure out, what's their story beyond the book. Because that's really the essence of publicity. It's not just, hey, this is a good book and you should review it, because a lot of people are just, the review possibilities are very limited. People are, just people, for example, People Magazine used to have, like, 4 or 5 pages of book reviews. Now they have 1 page, and there's barely, 5 books on it. So the opportunities for book reviews are very limited. So what that means is you have to get creative. So when I work with my authors, I try to pull out what their story is. So why did they write this book? There's usually some sort of true story that's factored into the novel they've written. So can they talk about that? Can they write about it? Is there an essay that we could place at a media outlet that would be a way to bring attention to the book? Are they an expert about something that, even though they've written a novel about it, they have an expertise that they could talk about the nonfiction aspect of their story? Because that's really, it's difficult, excuse me, to get radio interviewers to talk to novelists, and then unless there's something they can talk about beyond, this is what my book's about. So that's kind of the key that I work with my authors, is to figure out who they are and what their story is.
So can you give us an example of how you might go about that for a particular project?
Sure, yeah. So, gosh, there's so many. So I'm working on this fantastic crime police procedural called One Small Sacrifice by Hilary Davidson. It's coming out June 1st. And there's an aspect in the book about PTSD. One of the main characters is suffering from PTSD, and it's locked a lot of his memories. And so that factors into the crime, because who did he do it? He can't remember. There's all this, murkiness because of a past trauma that he suffered from. So Hilary Davidson, she had actually had a real life experience where, in one of her first jobs out of college, she was working in an office, and it was to do with veterans, and a disgruntled veteran came in and set the office on fire, and terrifying. Everyone was okay. She was escaped, but she recalled that experience really gave her, her own experience with PTSD. So
no doubt.
Yeah. So she, that really was a big inspiration for this character. So what I had Hilary do is she wrote a first person essay about it, and it's something that I'm using in my pitching. Like, her book is great. She has great advanced blurbs about this book, but she also has something she can talk about that is very relevant to a lot of people. And I think, readers, you often turn to books for an experience that, either relates to your own, or makes you feel like you're not alone. And so I hope that there will be readers who read this book and feel like they're not alone in reading this character and seeing his experience. So, yeah.
So that way, if I'm a radio guy or a TV guy, and I want to interview the author, and I say, okay, well, now we'll spend 3 minutes talking about the book, but now I've got another 5 minutes of content. We can talk about this story of the veteran coming out. That is that the idea?
Exactly. And that's something that's going to have more, in my experience, is going to have more appeal than just, oh, this is a best-selling author who wants to talk about her new book.
Well, then I should tell esteemed audience I was once attacked by giant robot bees. It was terrifying.
There you go.
More details coming in my memoir. So, if I'm an author listening to this and I'm saying $2,000, I wish I had that kind of budget. What is a realistic budget to set?
Yeah, I mean, just being honest, I am not cheap. My campaigns are $15,000 starting, and that is, but you have me. I mean, you have me. You have me thinking about your book at 2 a.m, literally on the weekends. I take on a very select number of projects because I want to make sure I can give 100% to each book that I'm working on. And it's a good chunk of time. I'm working on with authors. It varies, but it can be 8 months, it can be a year. My fee, I don't charge a monthly retainer. I've really found like if I have a wider time range, the work is kind of more spread out. If it's less time, then the work is more concentrated. So yeah, and I do press materials, I do online media, print media, broadcast media. I work with authors on story ideas of essays they can write. I set up book signings, depending on, if it's a middle grade book or a children's book. I do school tours. I'm there with my authors when they're in Los Angeles. I don't tend to travel with them. Just logistically, I have to be kind of at, ground zero to be doing my thing. But yeah, whenever there are LA events, I make sure I'm there at support. Yeah, pitching for book festivals. I work with my authors on social media. I don't do social media for them, but I counsel them on best practices and kind of give them, some are completely social media savvy, but some are really starting with nothing and think, oh, I've got to do social media to promote my book. And so we talk about like what's going to fit in with what their lifestyle is and their preferences and what's going to really work to support the book.
So with social media, is there one particular platform you found more effective than others?
Well, it sort of depends. I mean, Instagram, I think, is fantastic. Very, very visual. It's certainly where the younger readers are. So for my YA, we're all about Instagram. I think Facebook is more for the older set. I'm working with an author who's in his 70s and said, I don't want to do Instagram. I don't want to do Twitter. I know how to do Facebook. And I said, great, then. And he is doing fantastic. And he's posting photos and his reviews, and he has a good following on Facebook. So that's perfect. And then Twitter is good if it's your jam. Like Twitter's not for everybody, but if you're I think Twitter's great when you're part of the community rather than just, and this is really goes for social media in general. If you're joining the bigger community rather than just kind of blasting out info, my book, you can't do it that way. You have to really kind of ease your way into the group, support other authors, support other books, and I think then you're spreading good karma where other authors will then support you when your book comes out.
That makes sense. I block people that are my book, my book, my book. Especially people that tag me and like, hey, middle grade ninja, I have this book and it's about this. Like, don't pull me into your book. I don't even know what it's about yet.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, okay. So for authors listening to say, I have $15,000, or I can blow up my credit card because I'm going to make $200,000 on the back end from all the publicity. How
Yeah.
do you measure the effectiveness of a publicity campaign like that?
Now, this is another great question because this is the rub. I mean, if you spend $15,000 on advertising, it may or may not deliver, $200,000 in revenues for your book, but you'll see it. Like if you pay $15,000 for, I don't know, I'm sure it's a ton more, but if you bought like an ad in Entertainment Weekly, you would see your ad. With publicity, it's very amorphous. For me, you're paying for my efforts. I never say, I can guarantee that I will get you an interview on NPR and a Today Show and a New York Times review, because I just don't know. I'm good at what I do. I know that people listen to me and respect, media people respect me and will look at what I'm representing. But they'll never do it just because I say so. So in the end, it's still all about the book. The adage, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That's exactly right. So I still don't honestly know the answer to this question. How, at the end of a campaign, would you see, sure, if you do end up on the bestseller list, you can say, oh, okay, that publicity got me there. But it's the vast majority of authors don't hit the list. But I feel like at the end of a campaign, I've at the very least have built a really solid foundation of media coverage that is going to continue to send that author to greater and greater exposure. I think of my Goldberg McDuffie, when I first started there, was working with an author, this is again 1997, was working with an author no one had ever heard of. Her name is Jodi Picoult. She hired Goldberg McDuffie, and my Camille McDuffie, one of the most amazing publicists ever, worked with her on book after book. She wrote a book every year, and her books were really good. And they always had, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, they always had something topical in them that was was buzzy to talk about in an interview. Like she wrote a book, I can't even remember what year it was, but she wrote a book about abuse in the priesthood, and the book came out before kind of the news initially kind of blew up about all that in the Catholic Church, and so it was like she was an oracle. But that's all to say, she wasn't a New York Times #1 New York Times bestseller as she is now with that first book or that second book. But every book she got more and more publicity, and she built up more and more readers until she became a #1 New York Times bestseller. So I always caution authors that it's an investment, and if it's way more than your advance, it might not be a good idea to invest in an independent book publicist. Stick with there are so many good in-house publicists. Work with them. Give them the resources they need. Be the squeaky wheel. Don't just, wait for them to deliver you, a bunch of great reviews. I never want to work with somebody where it's really pushing their budget, because it's too scary. And I don't know, I just don't know what I'm going to get. I know I'm going to work my butt off. I know, and I never take on any book that I don't feel I can really deliver on. But yeah, that's kind of my advice. Like if you can't afford book PR, I think hiring an independent book publicist. I think you shouldn't. But if you can, you definitely should.
Another question on the back of that: if you want to be the squeaky wheel but respectful,
Yeah,
and not alienate your in-house
yeah,
publicist, what's a good way to bother them without doing that?
yes. Yes, you want to show that you have 100% faith in them, because if it comes across as like you're checking up on them, um, that will cause an adversarial relationship. So you want to really um, show them that you consider it a partnership, that you as the author are going to work as hard as they are, and I think it's about being organized with, when I work with a new author, one of the first things I ask is, okay, who do you know? Because who do you know in the media? Because it can be so surprising. People will say, oh, you know what, my roommate from college, I think she's now working in the features department at the Chicago Tribune, or whatever it is. Like, I those connections are so important. So it's really about offering up all the advantages and resources that you as the author have to your publicist, and then figuring out how to make the most of them. But I think it's not being too pesky, but you also, you can't just sit back and be like, have it. I've worked with authors where they came to me 6 weeks ahead of publication date, and they said, I've never heard from my in-house publicist. I don't know what's going on. I'm like, oh my God, you got to, you're not hearing, you got to go to your editor and say, who's my publicist, and let's make a plan. And a lot of times you have to take kind of take the initiative yourself without being too much of a pest. But I think you can't sit back and be passive either.
Yeah, fortunately, there are enough of those authors to clear out room for the others who aren't. I'm always amazed when I meet authors like, I wrote the book, now you do it. What?
Yeah, no, no,
Writing the
no.
book was the fun part. Now you do the.
Yeah, you know it.
But well, you said 6 weeks. That's way too late. So when should an author? How far ahead of publication should an author begin putting their marketing plan into place and start marketing the book?
Yeah, I mean, you really should be thinking about it at least a year in advance. I tend to work with authors about eight months ahead of publication date, but some authors, are coming to me now talking about books that are published in March of 2020. So, which is, I honestly, I tend to book up early, so it's good to come to me early. Um, but yeah, you really have to be, at least 6 months be figuring out what the plan is, like finding out what your publisher's plan is, because they may have it covered. You may not need anybody, but you need to know that. So, I would say, a year in advance, um, kind of get the lay of the land, and they won't have the publisher won't have the specifics of what they're going to do yet, but at least you'll kind of get a sense of what kind of the big picture, if your book is like a big book for the season, or if it's not, because then you really want to think about getting someone else to help you.
How do you know if you're the big book of the season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times you can tell by, your agent can suss that out, when they're clearly putting marketing dollars behind it. They're planning advertising or whatever. That's a good indication. If they're sending you to pre-pub conferences, that's a good indication. Um, yeah, I mean, I think if on your arc it just says, review copy mailing, then you might want to think about, because that's like the bare bones thing to do. So you might want to get someone to supplement on that one. So
Yeah, I can always tell when I get books in the mail, sometimes that I don't even ask for, which makes me sad because then I'm just going to set it aside or give it to a friend. Sometimes depending on the book, if it's in something I'd be interested in or not. And I think, oh, that came out of their marketing budget. That's a shame. Where was I going with that? I had a question for you, and it's gone right out of my head. So I better ask a different one. Um, Oh, if you're looking to work with an author, somebody comes to you and says, Megan, I heard you on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. You sound amazing. I know you're going to make at least $200,000 from a book. Um, how should they approach you, and what's your criteria for choosing who you're going to work with? And also, how many authors are you working with typically?
Sure, yeah. So usually authors will either email me directly. I'm Megan at meganbeatie.com, or they'll see through my website. There's a form you can fill out. So a lot of times people will contact me that way. Or they'll just call me. And it's nice to have the email first, because then I kind of have a sense of what the book's about, and even if I can, have the availability to take it on. But what I do is I look at it, and if it's a book coming out 2 months from now, I usually have to say, I'm sorry, I'm too busy, and I always try to recommend someone else to contact. But if it's something I think I could potentially work on, then what I do is I make sure I know publisher, publication date, what the book's about. I look at their website, I look at their social media presence, kind of get an overall sense of them, and then I'll set up a phone call. And it's really, they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing them, and to kind of talk about, a lot like how we're talking today, like who I am and what I do, so they can get a sense of me, and then I also want to hear what their expectations are. If they sound like a nice person. And that's my number one for my clients. They have to be nice. I've worked with too many pills in my more than 20-year career to not. So you have to be nice, first and foremost. And then second, you have to have a good book. So not all publicists do this, but I always read the book first before I say, yes, I definitely want to work on this. Because I have to see that it's good, and I have to see that I like it. Because I've had to work on some books that I didn't like, and it's just not fun. And
And isn't there a potential danger if you start sending around too many garbage books that people start ignoring your emails and phone calls?
absolutely, no, that's a great point. Yeah, so my reputation is always a little bit tenuous in that I'm as good as my last project. So yes, no, you're absolutely right. I do think about that too. So yeah, so I read the book, make sure I love it, and then I write a proposal. Here are all the things I can do for your book, and then it's up to the author. They will often talk to other authors I've worked with, which I think is a great idea, and really a good idea for authors to do their homework about publicists. Um,
What's
and
the
then,
best way to judge a publicist, assuming somebody already got rejected by you, they're heartbroken, but they're limping on and trying to find another publicist to work with?
yeah,
What is a good way to evaluate a publicist? Make sure you're getting somebody that's on the ball.
yeah, I think it's talking to them, having that phone conversation. Just you must talk to them by phone. I think I think doing a FaceTime, Google, like literally face to face, where you're seeing the person, I think is a great way. I'm always thrilled if it's a local person, so I can meet them in person. And then I think it's looking at what other books they've worked on. Like if you're a YA author, you shouldn't be with somebody who's mostly doing nonfiction, because especially with YA, it's a very close community, and you need someone who really gets it, and not only has the contacts, but knows kind of um, how to communicate. You can't pitch a YA media contact the way you would pitch someone at the Atlantic. It's a different style. So I think it's just making sure that your the publicist has an expertise in whatever your book is, in whatever genre. So
And an assumption I'd have, I'll throw it out there and you can challenge it and tell me I'm wrong. I love it when that happens because then I learned something. But one of the rudest people I have ever met in my life was a New York literary agent. And part of that could be just my Hoosier manner, that I'm just not accustomed to dealing with New Yorkers. But just the rudest woman ever. I still think about it sometimes and I still bristle a little bit. How rude. But by God, she gets it done. I'm forever seeing her doing just amazing things for her authors. I'm okay. If this is somebody you're approaching for a service, I understand why you as a publicist would want to work with an author that's a jerk. You don't want to have those Devil Wears Prada flashbacks. But if I'm an author and I don't have to deal with you other than professionally, how important is it that I find a publicist that's also a nice person?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on your style. Like some people don't need warm and fuzzy, and they just want a bulldog who's going to get it done. So if that's your style, then great. Um, yeah, for me, I just because I've worked with so many with all kinds of people, and I care deeply, and I keep thinking I'm going to get have a thick thick shell. But I still take everything so personally. So it's for me personally, I just I need to work with nice people who, who have faith in me. And so, um, because like kind of getting back to what we were talking to before, because publicity is so, it, it's hard to qualify. Like if I'm going after 200 media contacts and only hearing from two people who are reviewing my book, like my client has to know that I have tried all those people. Um, they can't think, well, she only tried two people. So they have to, there's definitely a trust factor involved.
So you like send an email, here's everybody that said no, try and have a good day?
Well, so here's the problem. When people don't want it, they don't say no. I'm actually elated when someone says no rather than, I would much rather have them say yes. But when they say no, at least I know and I won't bother them again. But when I don't hear back, it's like, are they not getting my emails? Is it going into spam? Are they deleting me without looking? Like you just don't know. And it's very, you really have to, believe that. And I get it because I've been on the other side. When I've worked on an incredibly popular book, it's so hard to keep up. Like you can only say yes to the things you want because otherwise you spend all your time being like, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. So I do get it for these busy journalists, but it can be soul crushing to not hear back from people. And it's getting, email is just, everybody's emailing. So, I like to think people see my name and it will at least open. I try to use the phone a lot, but I've heard like a book editor told me once, she's like, I don't even check my voicemail messages. So then so what good does that do? So then you're stuck with email and, I try not to be too gimmicky because it's just not my style, to get people to open an email, but it's challenging. It's very challenging, but it's so exciting when you hear back from somebody and they're like, oh my God, I love this book. I'm going to review it. So I try to do everything in a very customized, personalized way. So, for example, I'm working on a novel that's translated, from Spanish. It's called The Murmur of Bees. It's a beautiful historical novel. It's coming out this month. And I was trying to figure out like what book reviewers have reviewed other Spanish translations who this book might appeal to. And I found a reviewer at the Washington Post and I wrote to him and I said, I saw you reviewed, I can't remember the novel, but it was another Spanish translation. Would you be willing to check out my book? And he did, and he's going to review it. And so, that I'd like to think that showed him that I had done my homework, that I'm not just like doing a blanket blast to everyone. And, I was offering him something that would, in fact, have appeal to him. So I think that's really the key with publicity, is not just doing like a one size fits all, but really focusing in on who the book might appeal to.
So are you going through and sending personalized messages for everybody you contact to query, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, certainly I'll send an email, a blast email to my whole list if I have like a great Publishers Weekly review to share. Because that's really just like, I want you to know about this. So I'll certainly do it that way. But then when I'm going like, this is why you should review this book, it has to be very like, I know you, I know what you like, and this is why you should do this book.
That makes sense. I get lots of requests from authors and people, and I'm always forever behind on email. So if you're waiting to hear from me, I'm usually about a week behind. But it's just because I've got to prioritize writing and everything else.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd just be on email all day. But if I get an email that says, "Dear blogger," I'm already hovering over the delete button. You've already annoyed me. So that book really has to grab my attention for me to go any further than that. Those people usually don't get a response.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who writes for the Boston Globe, and her column is very specific. She does not review. She does not interview. She does, she talks to authors, big authors, like you have to have a big profile, about the books that they're reading. So she's never going to respond to like a blanket pitch of like, would you please review my book? Because that's not what she does. And that person is showing that they don't know what she does. So, it's just a good example of like, know who you're going after. And you just really can't just be like, let's see what sticks. You have to like hone in.
And I know you choose to focus not solely, but very specifically on a lot of middle grade, a lot of young adult.
Yes.
What is it? How is young adult and middle grade promotion different than promotion for nonfiction or adult books?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I remember I was trying to think of like what the first YA novel was that I worked on, and I think it was this book called Hick, which was published in 2007, which was kind of coming out before really YA was a thing. But we at the agency we would get calls about children's books, and we'd be like, no, we only do adult books. We only do adult books. And then this book Hick came along about this teenage character, and I ended up working on it, and it sort of was like the beginning of something for me that I just fell into, because I worked on this book, and then I started working on YA became bigger and bigger, and then the more YA authors I worked with, the more found out about me, until I became known as one of the prominent YA book publicists. And I think I love you can't really call it a genre, but the age range. I think the books are I love working in YA. I love the fantasy sci-fi aspects of it, the magic and the imaginative part of that aspect of YA, and then the contemporary realistic novels. I think when you're a young adult, you're experiencing these big life issues, a lot of times for the first time, and everything, like your first love is like the biggest thing in the world, and I love that how those themes come out in YA novels, and the authors are great. The YA literary community are, for the most part, really supportive and connected, and I'm really proud to be a part of working on those books. And I do the publicity for Y'all West, which is the Young Adult Book Festival in Santa Monica, coming up May 4th, which is so fun because it's a festival. They get like 20,000 people show up, and most of them are actually young adults. mean, that's sort of the what's curious about YA fiction is a lot of grown-ups are reading YA, but at this festival there are a lot of teenagers, and that is the coolest. Like whenever I'm somewhere where I'm seeing young people engaged about books and authors, that just like makes my heart sing. So great.
I'm used to going to lots of conferences where I'll talk to other adult authors and people in the publishing industry. And I went to RosieCon here, 3 or 4 weeks back. I met with Lamar Giles and some other tremendous YA authors, and there were actual teenagers in there. I was looking around like, oh yeah, that's who this is for. That it makes sense that they would be here. What a good idea.
Yeah, it's so true. I years ago, Ontario, California has this book, a young adult, a teen book festival, and it's at Ontario High School. It's like this gorgeous high school, and it was on a Saturday, and I went out there, and there were all these authors, and the audience was all like 30 and older women. And I was like, how is this possible when the festival is at a high school? Why did not every teacher say, turn up for the festival to get extra credit or something? Like here it's like on their own turf and there were no teenagers. It's amazing. But yeah, it's so great just when they actually, turn up and are really energized and excited about authors. So it's great.
What, assuming that, well, let me ask you a couple questions. You said 8 months is ideal to start planning a publicity campaign from launch date. And then how long do you continue promoting post launch? And when is it time to call it and focus on the next book?
Yeah, I mean, how, and publicists do it all different ways. My usual schedule is I stay on 6 weeks after publication date because I am all about the book launch. So my goal is for everything to happen at book launch, and then reviews and interviews with teachers don't always happen right on pub date. So they hit a little bit after pub date, and then they taper off. So usually by 6 weeks, um, the majority of the publicity has happened, and for me, it's time to move on. Uh, Certainly, I work with some authors on there are few authors I work with on an ongoing basis, and that's usually when they have multiple books coming out in a year. So I'm almost a project manager managing their brand and that sort of thing. But for the most part, like I'm doing launch and then I move on. So, but I try.
Why is that advantageous versus a book that's been out 2 years but is maybe picking up a little bit of steam, or the author wants to see about maybe doing a sequel but it hasn't done so well? Is there something to breathe new life into that, or is it just better to move on?
Well, many authors will come to me with exactly that, like, hey, I have this book and maybe something's new. There's new about it. Would you do a push for me? And I usually don't because just because I have enough work with the new launches, and when you work with the media, like it's about the news. So the news of the book is that it's coming out. So if a book's already out, like it's already been written about. So it's hard to kind of stir the pot again, I guess. But that's not to say there are many publicists who will do that, and especially if there is something new, like for example, a book has been out a few years, but now there's the movie is coming out, so that does allow for new opportunity to kind of get some new PR around it.
That makes sense. And then do you work with independently published authors as well as traditionally published? Or are you preferring to split mostly with traditional authors?
I honestly I prefer to work with published published authors by the big houses because the honest truth is it's easier. The established publishing houses have they have the distribution in place, they have the marketing in place, they have support in house. When you're an independently published author, you don't have that support, so you've got to create it all yourself. And so for the most part, I just don't because it's like a whole other layer of complexity. Um, but for example, I worked a few years ago with this fantastic YA author. Her name is Lauren Miller. She was traditionally published for a couple of her books that did well, and she wanted to write a new novel. She'd written a new novel and she wanted to do it herself. And she said, and she's someone I'd worked with before and I adore. And she's like, will you do it? And she said, I will. She's a very smart businesswoman. And she's like, I will have everything covered. I'm going to work with Ingram Spark. We're going to have distribution in place. I'm going to get a gorgeous jacket. I'm going to get blurbs. I said, okay. And it was great because, especially because it was a YA novel. The YA media, she already had this great reputation, so she wasn't a new voice. And we got as much or more publicity than we had for her previous book that had been traditionally published. So that's all to say, never say never, but as I tend not to, just because it's just more complicated.
And what's the most important thing, would you say, for an author to know going in about marketing? What's the number one thing you want to instill in authors that you're talking to and working with that they need to know going in?
Gosh, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit. You can't just write a good book and be like, I'm done. I'll just sit back and wait for the royalties to come in. It's a whole other aspect of writing a book is the marketing and the publicity, and you can't, as an author, you just can't be passive. You have to be an active partner in it. And I don't mean that you should be contacting newspapers yourself, but you do have to think, okay, who do I know who can help me? And making sure you have a great website that's easy to navigate and interesting, and doing social media and figuring out, do you have like a big, say you live in Los Angeles but you're from San Francisco and you have a family there and a big local network, like you got to have an event there, have an event in San Francisco, but you can't expect the bookstore to fill the house. You have to be like, set up an Evite and get your people to rally.
So how would an author go about that? Are we talking a newsletter, Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah. One of my good friends, whose name is Fazia Burke, and you might want to think about having her on your podcast. She's an internet. She does book marketing, and she has this great book called Internet. I think it's called Internet Marketing for Busy Authors. And she says in the book, her number one recommendation is that authors build a mailing list. So you have your website and you have subscribe to my mailing list, because especially now the way social media is, and if you put something on Facebook, your followers are not necessarily going to see it because of the way the algorithm works. But with the mailing list, if people have opted in, and you should never subscribe people unless they said they want to join, but people who have opted into your list are the most likely to open it. So as long as you don't pester people by sending like an e-letter every other day, and you're offering value added information, not just like my book, but here's something special for fans of my series, this new book, and download an excerpt, or whatever it might be. But building the mailing list is super important, and that's really a long-term process. But over time, you could build a really solid mailing list so that a few weeks before your book's coming out, you can send your list and make an announcement. And I always encourage authors to send to their their personal contacts. My book is coming out. Here's where I'm appearing. Please, order my book. Not just on Amazon. Make sure you offer all the online sites. But please, if you like my book, write something about it on Goodreads, on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, all of the sites. Like, don't just read it. If you like it, review it, because those reviews build, like a Goodreads author, your books, the more positive reviews you have, the more likely you're going to get attention from, the Goodreads editorials. So I encourage people to always mobilize their network about supporting their book. Share it on Twitter, put the jacket on Instagram, whatever it might be. But people don't always, your friends who love you don't always think that that's what they need to do. So you just have to kind of remind them.
Makes sense to me. Well, Megan, I have so many more questions for you about marketing, and I know you have so many more answers that I would benefit and the esteemed audience would benefit from. Unfortunately, I also know we're coming here toward the end of our time. Remind esteemed audience where they can find you online, how they can get set up with you.
Sure thing. So my website is meganbeatie.com, and it's meganbeatie.com. So meganbeatie.com, and you can find me on Twitter at mbeatie, and Instagram mubeatie, and Facebook is Megan Beatie Communications. And yeah, I'm happy to, feel free to reach out and ask me questions, and I'm happy to, if anyone's interested, I'm happy to set up a phone conversation.
50% discount to anybody who listens to the podcast. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Thanks so anyway, Rob.
Megan, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you again for making the time. And esteemed audience, obviously, I'm at middlegradeninja.com. Come there, see me. If you like the show, if you're an author or a publicist, a literary agent, anybody in publishing who'd like to be on the show, please don't hesitate to email me. I'd love to talk with you. Make sure you come back on Monday when we'll be talking with Padma Venkatraman. Make sure you get registered at mauricebradas.com for MoCon coming up here, May 3rd through the 5th. And please subscribe and review. That's greatly appreciated. Don't forget to download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, or the Book of David if you're feeling adventurous. Megan, I've been asking our guests to sign us off with our sign-off phrase, which is hi-ya and what have you. When you sign us off.
Hi-ya and what have you.
Thanks again. This is wonderful.